us. I hope we'll be able to follow through. So we talked about the interface, and we said we'll be using Anaconda. And the best practice is go and pin Anaconda somewhere in your taskbar. So pin Anaconda in your taskbar. This will help you in access. So every time you want to use Anaconda, you don't have to be searching. Just like SPSS, Anaconda is one of those heavy software, so it takes time for something to happen in your screen. My advice is don't open the software several times. Your computer will hang. So if you open Anaconda, this is what you will have. And we said this is a toolkit. For those who are keen on data science, you will know that the tools that you need to have is either Jupyter, which will enable you to write Python programming, and RStudio, which is now the infrastructure for R. Of course, for other programmers, they use things like PyCharm and all the rest, but all these tools that you have here in one way or another is meant to perform something to do with data. So it's up to you maybe to expand your knowledge, apart from just understanding Jupyter. What are other infrastructure that are there? So if I launch Jupyter, remember we said Jupyter operates as a client user server, whereby there is no such thing as Jupyter, but instead, if you open Jupyter, a tab in your default browser will open up. As you can see, we're using Chrome on my end, and so it should be on your side. The beauty of this is you don't need to be connected to the internet so that you use Jupyter, as opposed to the Google Colab, which you said you should have internet connection so that the notebooks that you will have will be stored in your drive. So once you have an interface like this, then there are two options here. So this is majorly the interface of Jupyter, and like I said, I'm not so good with using PowerPoint and some sort of presentation as I go. So as much as we have this guide, but you might find this is only meant for you to read. So make sure you have the introduction to Python. So what are we doing at the moment? First, you need to familiarize yourself with the software or the language. Later is when we will jump into now analysis part of it. So just like the way you learn any other language, say you need to know how to communicate first before you say you're solving problem using the language. So we look into the few definitions. We talked about what happened. And for Jupyter, we said the fact that it's easy to access, then Jupyter will be our most preferred platform. But nonetheless, you can also be using Google Colab. I'm not telling you to just depend on Jupyter. And for the interface, the main thing that I'll focus on right now is how to upload a notebook and how to create one. So we'll start with creating new. So just like the way you can open a new worksheet. So we're going to have notebooks in this case. And to open a new notebook, you'll go to the option of new. On your side, you will see Python 2 or Python 3. I hope that is the case. But we will be using what we call Python 3 because now the Python as a language has evolved. And there's a slight difference between Python 2 and Python 3. So depending to how soon you are introduced into programming. So for some of us, or for those who understand Python 2, you realize there's a bit of adjustments. And maybe in few years to come, we'll have Python 3, 4, and so forth, because this is a language that is growing. Like I said, thanks to this community, and at the moment, I think it's around, the community is growing. Let's see what the numbers are. So there's a social platform whereby you can be able to interact, but just go and check how many people are part of the community right now. I think that is some of the factors that you need to look at when you're learning a certain language, because you want a language that will be there for centuries. Of course, based on the dynamics of whatever career path you want to take. So in your Jupyter, we said the main thing is how to open a new notebook and upload. And for new, you will select Python 3. And this is how your interface should look like. So before you write codes, you need to understand when your cell is active. So just like the way we had a cell during Excel. So you can refer to this part also as a cell. And when you see the blue color in your cell, like what you're having at the moment, then it means this cell is not active. You cannot write anything here. If you click inside, you notice that the color will now be green. This indicates that that cell is active. Now you can be able to write your codes. So this is where we'll be writing our codes. And by definition, we said codes are basically instruction. And this instruction, the software can be able to understand. And because of that, codes can either mean a command or a comment. Commands means these are that the software reads and understands, and it will return to you some sort of output. So it's a command. You command the software to do something. So first, before it does anything, it has to understand and then return to you some output. So that is a command. For comments, we said comments are codes because they're instructions. The software would understand, but it doesn't necessarily need to return some output to you. The point is, commands so comments and commands, you can say, okay, let me see. Error code. Okay, it's good. You fixed that. I think let me just tell you, you should start getting confident to make sure you go an extra mile to find the trouble or the problem that is causing your error. So we'll be writing both comments and commands on the cell. And how will the software differentiate between the two? For comments, you will start with hashtag, and we can say introduction, to Python programming, data science. So if I execute this, whatever I've just entered there, I'm not going to get an error. And the reason why I'm not going to get an error is because I've started with an hashtag, and hashtag indicates that whatever you're writing is not a command, but it's a comment. So comments are meant to explain what your commands are supposed to do. And assuming you want to say hello to the world, you can say print hello world. The commands to use for that, then you'll use a function print. So let's understand about functions and commands. And in Python, functions or commands are case sensitive. That means they should be in lowercase. The same way we did in Stata. All commands are in lowercase. So the command print is meant to print text or to display text. I want to print hello world. I will open parentheses, and inside the speech marks, because I'm writing a text, I will write there hello world. No such big deal about whatever we're writing. But let's understand how do we execute commands. If you control enter, you realize that the software will execute that code and an output is presented for me. So this is the input, this is the output. And of course, I wanted the software to display for me hello world, which I can see from here. The only thing is, what if I have other codes that I want to write? With the use of control enter, it doesn't open up a new cell for you to proceed and write other commands. So the best way to execute commands moving forward, I want you to try using Shift Enter, and you realize with the Shift Enter, your command has been executed, you have received your output, and now you have a chance to write other line of codes. Let's talk about variables and objects. And just like in your quantitative analysis class, your journey always begins with objects or variables. And by definition, at the lower level, we define variables as attributes or characteristics of a population that someone is interested to understand. At this level, I want us to envision variables and as objects. And when you call them objects, it means they're more of a container. So you want to have some element, but all these elements, you want them to be accommodated in an object called X. So as much as we're talking about the same thing, but your mindset should start shifting from just the primary research work to now working with objects. So one of the main concepts in programming is the use of variables, or sometimes referred to object-oriented programming. And these are your best friends. Start getting tough conformation. And now this is what represents your data. So let's say you want to have a variable, and you want the variable to be named X. And there is, if you recall, we said the reason why we're using Python actually is one of the simple language or the closest language to human logic. So if I want to assign an object X to have an element 5, I will just equate X with 5. If I execute that, I'm not getting an error. But the best practice is, if you always want to see an object that you have created, you have no choice but to call it. So first, let's talk about different types of objects that are there. Or we can talk about data types, because we say these objects are the ones which contains the data. So what types of data are there? One, we have data types that are referred as numeric, and we'll say all objects that contain elements that are numbers. They fall under numeric. So the same thing we built during our beginners class, and we said all questions that the answers you're getting are in numbers, they fall under numeric. The same case here. You need to know the objects with the data types numeric, but at this level, we will not just leave at numeric. We'll have to understand that numeric can be split into 3. One, we have what we call integers. 2, we have what we call floats. And 3, we have what we call booleans. So let's understand this. And the data types, or the types of objects or variables that you'll be creating, we have what we call numeric data types. And with numeric data types, you can further split it into integers, floating points, and lastly, boolean. apart from numerics, you also have what we call string data types. And string data types are now those objects that have alphabetic characters. So if you have an object or a variable y, and y contains names of participants, then you'll say y is a string variable or object. The last part, we have what we call complex. So we have numerics, strings, and complex, because it's very rare to use complex, but you can say complex data are data that have both numeric and alphabetic characters. So things like registration number. Now you have combination of both a string and the numeric. You can call them complex. So we're going to create different types of data as you execute them, so that we understand how the language works. And we'll start with creating numeric variables. So I will comment creating variable or and I'll say creating variable x, the numeric element, we say this one is simple. So if you want an object x to have an element 5, of course, to check the content of x, just write x. If you execute that, realize the software returns to me 5. If I want to check the type of variable x, I will just write type. And inside the parenthesis, we'll have x. If I execute that, I'm getting an error. It poses a question. Why do you think I'm getting an error? I just created a variable x.
Hashtag.
Sorry?
It's a comment, so you start with hashtag. Or?
The comment where I'm starting with hashtag. Okay. So I'm here to type. I think I'm getting error from type because I want the software to tell me what type of variable is this x. But the software is returning to me x as an error, and it says what? Name x is not defined. What do you understand by that error?
I don't know.
Okay. So if you notice, when I was creating variable x, I used capital X. So I said x is 5, but the x is capital. But when I'm calling the type, I'm using small letter x. So the software doesn't know what is this x.
Okay.
Okay. So always be careful with the variable you create or the variable name. So let's see if we're going to get the type of a variable x. And here you go. I'm told that variable x is an integer. We can create variable x. And I want us to learn something about Python. And we call this reassigning values. So what happened here is I'm trying to combine some few concepts, even though it's what you're supposed to learn ahead. But you will notice that in Python, if you create a variable x, or you define a variable x, and then later go ahead and create another variable x, then what happens is Python will not prompt you that a variable x already exists, but instead it will reassign and move on. So again, be careful when you'll be creating your objects and variables, because you might end up replacing maybe a variable that was relevant during your operation. So let's look at another type of numeric, because now we know an integer are those numbers that are between 1 and 9. So when you talk about floating points, you can say floating points are those numbers that have decimal points, and number x if I execute that, then I'm able to get the elements 1.5, 1.0, and 2.3. What was the last thing you heard from me? Apologies for that. I lost connection. What was I explaining before I lost you guys?
You were explaining the part where you said
different data types. And when we look at the first data type, we said what is numeric, and numeric is you have integers. And what is an integer? And integers are numbers between 1 and 9. That means they're all numbers. If I check the data type for x, if it tells for me a tuple, okay, okay, this is something than I expect. So of course, at some point we'll talk about tuples and list. See that. Okay, so if that becomes a string. Okay, I think we have some slight improvement or changes with this function. But so you know, I think I can mention this again. Some of the advantages of this level is with this function, just like the way we said, there's some function that comes with Excel. At this stage, you will be able to also create your own function because you said everything we do here is subject to what the community produces. So at some level, when you advance your skill, you can also be a contributor to the Python community, whereby you can also come up with your own functions. So we're still at the data types or variables, and by definition, we said what? All positive and negative whole numbers without any decimal are the ones which fall under integer. Floating points are real numbers, but they have decimal point. And last we said we have now Boolean. And for Boolean characters, these are the true and false characters. So of course we denote true means 1 and false means 0. And we use these during the, was it VLOOKUP? Whereby you're saying 1 denotes approximate and 0 denotes exact match. So this is what we are covering at the moment. And that's why it's strange when I was telling you to check the data type for whatever numbers we're having there. So I think it makes sense when let's execute with x having only one item. And we realize that right now, if I check the data type of X, I'm getting a float and not a tuple. So let's understand something here. So let's talk about tuple and float. And I hope I'll not be confusing. But when you talk about containers, so you can say an object X is a container, but depending with what you can do with that container, again, you can be able to classify. Either you can make changes in the items in your container because what you use to create. So at the moment we use the parentheses. So you'll appreciate that parentheses create tuples. Brackets create what we call the list. And lists are now variable types whereby you can make changes in them. A good example, if you have a list of students in a class, that means you can be able to add a student or remove a student from that class. It's also called a list. We also have dictionaries, and for braces, we'll use braces to create dictionaries. So I was just trying to introduce a bit of this concept, but more is on your side. Read through this document, Introduction to Python, so that when we'll be talking about parentheses, brackets, and braces, we should all be on the same page. So right now we know a variable types integer, we also know float, and assuming I create a variable y and I equate y with, let's say, false, but for Boolean characters is I think that the only functions again which you can write with caps. I think for now, let me drop for Boolean. We'll interact with Boolean a bit later. So, but so you know, based on the definition, you can say for Boolean is numeric with true and false. More of logic. So when we're talking about if statement and logic, we'll interact more with Boolean characters. Let's talk string. And strings are variables with alphabetic characters. So I can have y to contain, let's say, names of an individual. And if I have George, I can call y if I check type of y, I'm told that it's a string. So far, what have we covered? We know what is a variable, what's an object, and we also know the different types of objects that are there, numeric, strings, and in terms of numeric, we also know integers and floats. And also we know what is a function. So a function print basically displays some text to you, and a function type is that function that will enable you to know the type of object you're working with. Also, we can have int as a function, and you will know it's a function based on the color. So functions are green in color. And if I write int, and inside the bracket, I have variable x. If I execute that and check the type of x this time, you realize that, okay, execute this. I don't know if it's my system or my, because there's no way x it can be a float, because it has just been converted from 1.5 1. So 1 is not a float. This is where I'm disagreeing with my system. So what am I saying here? Okay, let's try this. Assuming I use the function float, then I have x. If I check now the type of x, get an error. If I get x. So I'm getting a floating point here. So what am I explaining? The function int is meant to convert an object, or it's meant to convert a floating point to an integer. So at the moment I had object x as a floating point with an element 1.5, but with the use of int, I can now have x, let me call x here, more or less. Okay. So as you can see, if I use int, the x, which is 1.5, I'm now having 1. Okay. But now if I check the type of x I'm getting is float, though it's 1. So integers basically convert a floating point variable types are there. Thank you all for your time, and text the admin your respective email address. There's some files that I want to share with you, and I only share through your emails. So immediately after the class, just write to the admin your email addresses, and we meet in class tomorrow.
you.